Warriors are not born. Warriors are forged in the crucible of adversity. Warriors without fear are warriors without courage. We are men destroying stigma and stereotypes. We are a band of brothers because in brotherhood there is strength. Our weapons are strength, empathy, and honesty. We are mental health warriors, and this is our voice.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, if you love what we're doing on the Mental Health Warriors podcast and are asking yourself, hey, God, how can I support these guys so they can help grow their platform and cover their costs? Well, let me tell you. You can go to patreon.com/mentalhealthwarriors and become a supporter of the show. All we're asking for is $1 or $2 an episode. And if you think we suck, you can cancel at any time. Also, if you could leave us a review on iTunes, that would help us get the word out, help people find our podcast, and it would mean an awful lot to us. Thank you so much. One of the best things about doing a podcast is I get to talk to all kinds of people I'd probably never have the chance to talk to otherwise. And Nick Halmasy is one of those people. Nick's a registered psychotherapist and a, quote, retired firefighter and fire instructor. We get into the quote part in the podcast interview. He's written a book to help first responders and their families begin conversations about mental wellness, and it's called After the Call. Nick has presented extensively on the topic of first responder mental wellness, with a deep understanding that PTSD is not the only mental struggle that will affect a first responder. Nick tries to counter this idea. While PTSD certainly destroys first responders and their families, there are a long list of other mental health struggles that can destroy first responders before PTSD ever gets a hold of them. So this is a really cool conversation because we don't just talk about first responders. The things we talk about in this call really apply to anybody, any family, any company. And Nick's a big focus is not on mental illness. I think sometimes we spend so much time focusing on the idea of mental illness that it actually creates the stigma that we're trying to eradicate because it labels people as sick. Nick talks about mental wellness, and there's a huge difference between those two things. And you'll see as we get into it, he does a really good job of articulating what the difference is. This was a great conversation between the three of us, myself, Nick, and Brian. We have some good laughs. Because it's three guys getting together, we obviously can't help but teasing each other. That's how we roll. But there's a lot of really good nuggets in there, and I appreciate what Nick is doing. He is a phenomenal guy. He is hilarious, but he's doing incredibly important work, and it's really an honor to call him a new friend. And that's really what this is about, right? So I hope you enjoy our conversation. Check out what Nick is doing at afterthecall.org. Enjoy the interview, and I can't wait to hear what you think. All right, I'm really pumped to welcome Nick. Hey, how do you say your last name anyways? I should know that before I started. Halmasy?
Halmasy.
Nick Halmasy. Yeah. So I wanted to, first of all, welcome to the show, man. It's great to have you. And I wanted to tell the audience that I asked this guy for a headshot today. And he sent me this friggin' picture that, like, I'm now in love. Let's put it this way. I'm now in love with firefighters. All the firefighters I've seen, nobody turned me before the picture.
So you're welcome.
Yeah, we'll link to that in the show notes page. So anyways, it's great. It's great to have you, man.
Yeah, thanks I just want to say, appreciate both of you having me on, giving me a, soapbox, and let's see what kind of trouble we can get into.
Right on. Okay, Brian, Nick, you can kick it off.
Okay, first off, I'd like to say, Nick, Jason's comments on firefighters are totally of his own making and do not reflect the majority of the opinion of this show.
Okay. Yeah. Steeping with jealousy, I hear.
Yeah.
It's the whole firefighter cop thing, right? It's the love-hate. So anyway, you know what, Nick? It's fantastic to get you on. We've been excited to talk to you for quite some time now. Like Jason said, this is the first time that we've tagged team interviewed a guest.
Okay.
So Jason told us a little bit about your your life story and your background and your bio. Why don't you sort of give us a précis of what you're doing now with regards to the mental health field and what connected the three of us together?
Sure. So My experience in the fire service, obviously, if you spend any time in that service, you start to get a collection of things that you perhaps didn't want. And I was rural, so I spent 10 years in the rural firefighting. So there was nothing. There's no city. There's no EAP. There's nothing, right? There was a pat on the back. How you doing? I'm fine, and so on. So while that was going on, I happened to want to go back to school, and I landed in an intro psych course and loved it, took it, ended up going further and further until my bank account could lead me any further. And in amongst that, I started what is After the Call. So it's been going for about 4 years. My whole goal there was to provide resources to first responders that otherwise couldn't get them. So it's 100% free. All the services are free. I say take what you can off the site, make it work for you. Call me, email me, do anything. And, if I don't have the answers, I'll do my hardest to get them for folks. And, it's been an interesting road, mostly because it's been nothing but roadblocks when you think that you would give something away for free. It's just, and that's the first responder culture being really guarded, right? And so coming from the inside, now on the outside, trying to get myself back on the inside, you think it'd be a bit easier, but it's been interesting, but this year kind of took off. So this year took off, and I think it was a mutual friend. It kind of introduced Jason and I, and I sent him that pic, and he found smitten, and now we're here.
Clearly,
yeah,
yes.
Basically how it went down. So, hey, when you talk about roadblocks, can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So, it's hard for me to define really, but I think it's twofold. If I'm being fully transparent, I always have the worry about being correct, right? So everything that I do on the site's research based, but I'm by myself mostly, and now not so much, but at the beginning certainly. So that was half of it. But the other half was mental health is not something you can talk about in the first responder field. At least that was the true 5-6 years ago. It's getting better, but unfortunately, you still have folks who dig it, get it, and folks who don't. And I have a small private practice, so I see folks, and it's interesting to hear the stories they tell me, because many of the people I see have been in the service a long, long time, and say, if it wasn't for X, I would never have bought into the story, right? But once it becomes real for them, then it becomes real, and it's unfortunate because I think that a lot of people get lost in the mix and in the shuffle. So those are some of the boundaries. The other boundaries are the services themselves. So we're talking about like first responder culture. So if you're on the outside looking in, and maybe Brian, you can speak to this to see if this matches with your experience. But as far as I can tell, when you're on the outside looking in, you see first responders, and they're all grouped together: fire, EMS, police, unfortunately corrections, and dispatch is often laid out. But if we just stick to those three for kind of clarity's sake, when you are on the outside looking in, that's what you see. But when you're on the inside, those three services are so different than each other. So, trying to create a platform which reaches all of them has been damn near impossible for me. And to get EMS, fire, and police at the same table, I haven't seen it happen yet.
Yeah, you know what? I think you're right. I think it's odd because there's enough. There's enough shared experience there with critical incidents, with traumatic incidents, with being surrounded by, let's face it, just shitty situations on a day-to-day basis, right? Where generally, people are calling us on their work, not at their best of times, but usually at their worst of times. So we have that shared experience, but there's, just enough difference in the cultures and the command structure and sort of, the policing has more of a sort of a paramilitary history. There's just enough there that I can absolutely see where it would create those roadblocks that you alluded to earlier, which is why I love the fact that when you post stuff on After the Call, you do try to post as broad, a cross section of topics and even the downloadables as possible. Mm-hmm. But I think you're right. Getting everyone at that same table sometimes is a hell of a task.
Yeah, when I attended a talk about somebody on stateside who's doing kind of the similar thing. He's essentially the TEMA of the U.S. and he did a talk in Peterborough that I attended, and it was interesting. And I vowed never to have this happen to me, but it is. That he just said that I can't get it. You know, I've talked to LAPD, and they just come up at the end of the day and ask me, why are you here? You're not a cop, right? And I can tell you, there's no secret. When I write those articles, I first write for firefighters. I send those out to the firefighting magazines that I've been published in before. And then I delete firefighter and I put first responder and I post it online because it's the same damn thing, right? It's mental wellness. It's the same thing. And that's what we're talking about. That's what's so frustrating to me. And it's just like, if you haven't had lived experience, then you don't get the buy-in, you know? And it's just really frustrating. I mean, almost enough to want to become a cop and hang up my hat, right? And that's a hard pill to swallow, you know?
Yeah, that's funny, but at least your intentions are noble, so that's good.
Yeah.
So hey, listen, I think there's two things that you touched on there, and one is something Brian and I have been talking about a lot, and actually we're going to get together for dinner tomorrow night and talk about this in more detail. But it's about leadership, right? And it's about sort of the, you know, as Brian said, in policing, the paramilitary history, but whatever the historical reason is, there's a certain style of leadership as far as first responders. And honestly, I mean, I've seen this style of leadership also very frequently in the corporate sector as well. So it's certainly not limited to, but it's, you know, sort of a closed off command style leadership, right? It doesn't focus on the human being. It more focuses on, you know, the people as employees and resources and producers of units of work. And where do you think that, so, I mean, in your experience in you know, firefighting culture or first responder culture, where does that come from, and what do we have to do to change it?
Well, it's interesting. I'm working right now on some work on culture itself. And so when you bring leadership in, you can't avoid that conversation about culture. But on the leadership piece, I would say, broadly speaking, and not to get too philosophical, right? If we look at everything as needing to be on the hierarchy, when you enter that and you're told that you need to get to the top, right? When you enter the fire service, you're gunning for the white hat. When you enter the corporate service, I'm guessing you're gunning for the office in the tallest part of the building, right? And
sure.
And we have that, right? We, you know, all three of the services, the more kind of chevrons you have, the more authority you carry. And that doesn't mean that you're better or know what you're doing sometimes. It just means in some of these places, you've just been there longer, right? And if you've been there longer and you've had that bad attitude, then it becomes the top-down problem. And that's what I see in a lot of different areas, is that top-down problem. But I also think the leadership, right? If we look at leadership and the problems with that, we look at a leader needing to say exactly what you're asking them to say, which is, I'm vulnerable and impenetrable to the calls over the years. And if I call into question my ability to conduct myself, that makes me less of a leader, I think, right? So I see that as a problem of the stigma around mental health as a whole, but certainly of the hierarchical nature of these three services, and certainly in the corporate world, I can only assume would be the same, but I certainly can't profess to know that.
Yeah, I think Brian, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the police hierarchy specifically, but I think part of it is it's innate within us, right? I mean, we have there's this concept called a dominance hierarchy, and we always want to move up to dominance hierarchy because it allows us to understand, like, to make sense out of where we are in a particular group. And that, I think that way of thinking, it's prevalent in nature. You know, we are of nature, obviously, and so I think that's just sort of a default structure that we fall into when we're organizing how a company or an organization should be structured. It's almost like, I don't know, just like I said, a default way of structuring it. So people higher than you on the food chain are better somehow, and people that are lower than you are, you know, maybe subordinates in more ways than just being on an org chart. So anyways, Brian, what are your thoughts?
Well, actually, Nick, I just want to take a little detour here for a sec.
Sure.
You wrote a piece a couple of months ago on the site, and I believe it was called "The Calls That Stick."
Yeah.
And
okay.
it was about the train fatality you had attended.
Mm-hmm.
And something you wrote in there, I'm just remembering it when we were talking about, you mentioned corporate culture. I remember you being quite, maybe not angry is the right word, but I remember you being very incredulous that, you know, this the train company, and I know you never said who it was, but
Yeah.
a private corporation had a better, more integrated, more thorough process in place for getting their, in this case, the conductor, for getting their people away from the scene, rested, relaxed, refreshed, checked out, and then back to work. They had a better plan in place than, the 20 or 30 people who were attending there as first responders.
Yeah.
Do you think that in some cases, the first response world, there are things we can pick up from the corporate sector, I guess, along those lines? Do you think that maybe having sort of this sort of warrior / hero mindset in many cases is actually damaging, and maybe we should be looking at some of these things more like disaster recovery for a business? Do you think there's any credence to that, or do you think the gulf is just too big?
Well, you hit on about 30 things I want to talk about in there, so I'll try to remember them, but you can remind me.
Sorry.
First and foremost, thank you for picking up on my incredulity, because when I first wrote that, I wrote that out of straight rage and anger. So I'm glad that I got it down to a respectful tone that people could pick up on. So first, certainly it's frustrating, and I knew, like, at that time, that was the call, right? That was the call that, I say, without trying to go on too much of a diatribe, I say there's scars and there's scabs, right? And so that one for me was a scab for a long time that I picked at. And I don't profess to be, like, I'm pretty straightforward and transparent, that I don't carry, at least that I know of, a diagnosis of any kind. But certainly I went through what I would say are the normal reactions to stress in that call. And that is the nightmares, the irritability, the not flashbacks, but certainly distressing memories, kind of the images coming back, right? And, one of the things that I tell folks, especially the recruits that I go and talk to, is that shit is normal, right? So don't call it PTSD, because you take away from folks who have that, and that's a debilitating disorder that demands respect, I think. And the part of that is understanding that when you go through a normal stress reaction, that's what you expect. So part of that is taking away that media thing. But that's a diatribe, and I'm trying to stay on track here. So,
diatribes are okay. We welcome those.
Go wherever you want, man. There's no structure.
So you're speaking to something that is really at my forefront, and I know that we all come from, I think, a place where a respectful professor, perhaps, that I've been listening to a lot lately, and just what he's saying makes a lot of damn sense to what we're talking about here, and that is interesting when I was thinking about what to talk about tonight, and hoping that you would do just what you're doing is leading me, so I didn't have to think too much about it, but the hero identity that first responders have, which is unavoidable as part of the culture, is also damning. Right? So what I mean by that is that you can be in the corporate world, and it is 100% completely understandable that if you were to experience a trauma, you would be removed from your job, taken away for debriefing, rested mentally, and then you would be brought back in a sequential manner to ensure your mental safety.
Absolutely.
That makes so much damn sense to me, but we will not adopt it because, as I say, the litmus test is you just go back, you go to any hall, you go to any fire department, at least I can speak only to the fire department. You go to any one and you ask after a bad call how it was, 90%, at least this is what I still hear, right? 90% of the time you hear, I'm fine. And that, to me, that's your litmus test for stigma in your fire hall. And that's the hero image. And I don't think people realize that, like, recognize it, right? Is that when you're inducted into this and then you get to wear the t-shirt, as I say, once you get the t-shirt, you're in, and then it comes with the gear and stuff. And, I know police culture is a bit different in that you don't dare put stickers on your car and whatnot. We can make lots of jokes, but I think the reality is the seriousness of what would happen to your vehicles if you guys did that. But certainly part of the fire service, right? That's a big thing. License plates and the cars, and why do you do that? You do that for the recognition. Why do you want the recognition? Because the recognition largely by the public is that you're a hero, right? You're a hero. You're a hero for standing on the 401 and waiting for a tow truck. You're a hero for, going to your fifth, difficulty breathing call at 4 a.m. That's the hero image, and that's the majority of the calls that you're getting. Rarely do you get a structure fire unless you're city, right? Rarely do you get, maybe twice a year, right? 3 times if it's a good year and nobody gets hurt. Mm-hmm. But I mean, the things that you sign up for fire, it is not what the life is. So you have to kind of ignore that and adopt that hero image, because A, that reminds you why you're doing it, which I think is noble in its kind of pure form, but B, it demands of you the inability to suggest that anything fucking bothers you. And that is something, and that maybe coming back to the barriers, that's a barrier. That's a barrier right there, is that I'm stripping away that very image. If you Google firefighter right now, you will find first my picture, but then all the other pictures. And they're all of, dudes kicking in doors with flames and explosions behind them. And it's just like, the more I think about it, the more I realize that the culture that we are in, the culture that we create is damning us, is putting us in this position where it is impossible to break free of that stigma without letting go of that. I certainly haven't figured out a way to articulate in a way that I think makes sense yet, but I'm working on it. But you're essentially taking something away from them, and that's why I get the resistance from some of the folks who, went through some shit, have seen some stuff, have dealt with it probably unhealthily, and the little tidbit of what they've got holding them to sanity is the idea that they can go home knowing that they're a hero. And so we get into that kind of, at what point is this unhelpful versus what point is this actually maintaining their mental well-being, because it's on such a thin thread, if that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely it does. I think the real danger is if you, as a first responder, start to buy into that image too much, and you develop, this superhero complex, and that's when you get reckless. That's when you start taking stupid chances, like, stopping cars by yourself in the middle of the night when you should be waiting for backup. Right. Or kicking in the wrong door, when you're not, when the captain or the chief of the scene's lost track of you, So I think it's one thing to build the image, and it's very much another to buy into it. And I think, and you've mentioned you've spoken to, fire recruits. I've been lucky. I've done one presentation at OPC. And I've talked to lots of college level classes, and you try and tell them that, don't buy into this image. Your job is your job, and love it. And you can see, this old guy doesn't know, this old guy doesn't know what he's talking about. This, I'm going to be a rock star and I'm going to change the world. And you know what? At one point we were all that idealistic. Yeah. And then reality comes along, and you have that first sobering call, and you go, Jesus, this isn't a costume, it's a uniform. And at the end of it, it's just a job, and it's had a profound effect on me. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, one of the stories I like to tell people is when I started, I guess I was coming up on 11 years. I've been retired, and I'm doing air quotes because I'm looking for my way back in, but I've been retired since last September. But one of the stories I like to tell is what's called the sniff test. So in the fire service, way back when, the sniff test was after a structure fire. You'd stick your head in the structure. If your eyes watered, you needed to ventilate. If not, then you could go in and do overhaul, right? And that was the recruit's job, the probie. That's what they did, right? You lugged all the shit for everybody else, you cleaned up, and you stuck your head in the building to let them know when it was good to go inside. And I tell that story not because it has anything to do with mental health, but that was 10 years ago. That's 2005. Like, we already knew we had 21 cancers specifically for firefighters, and that was under WSIB. Like, that is ours, right? We get to have those special for us. And we still did that shit. And, another call I remember and this going back to leadership, man, like, I had a call where it was a CO call, right? That, that dangerous, noxious, invisible, and unsmelling gas. And as a probie, I was sent in the building by myself. I thought it was great because I didn't know any better at the time. And when you're fresh, and that's getting to speaking to, the students and that. But, looking back on that, I'm like, what the hell? Like, I didn't know what it was doing. I didn't hardly know how to use my pack. I knew it went on my back and there was a face thing that went on my face. But I'm just thinking these are I know that there is still departments that function with a management system that is like that. I know that that's true. And I know that they're becoming fewer. But the idea is if we can't take a simple idea like safety seriously now, how are we going to take something that's so vulnerable like stigma and mental health seriously, right? Everybody wants awareness. And I think, Jason, you said this to me, and I've used this all the time, is that, awareness means someone else can do the work, and that's perfect, right? And,
Yeah, absolutely.
When I heard that, I said, that makes so much sense, right? So, then I had to tailor it back because the title of my book has awareness in it. So now I've just been telling people that I cheated and threw actual stuff in it, but if it didn't say awareness in the front, you wouldn't read it. So I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
No, one thing I think is interesting is you guys both alluded to it, right? Was Brian, when you said it was, you both talked about sort of the hero, the heroic stereotype of a first responder. And also, Brian, you alluded to the fact that, it's a job. And I find one of the things that was really devastating for Cindy, my first wife, was that she really bought into the notion that, here's the stereotype of a police officer, heroic and strong and decisive and all of that kind of stuff. You are now a member of this tribe. This is not what you do. It is who you are, right? And that was, I remember her telling me that, and me at the time thinking, geez, that seems kind of weird that they would say that, but whatever. They must know what they're doing. It was a lot younger, and then when she was struck down, and she was no longer part of that tribe, one of the most devastating things to her was her loss of self-identity, because she had bought into the hype, and she had allowed herself to, derive a big portion of her self-identity from an external source that, as we're talking about right now, can be taken away from you if things, when things happen. So how much of that do you think has to do with sort of the stigma and the difficulty people have in dealing with these issues when they issues from the OSIs, from the job?
Yeah, all of it. It has all of it to do. So if I had a way to show you an image, what I usually sum up the first responder, as I was talking about, like as you're an outsider looking in, you see the first responder bubble, but inside, if you see sort of a diagram with those bubbles slightly overlapping, but not really, I say, first you work so hard to get in, right? So, and Brian, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing this is similar for police as well. But, as a firefighter, first you got to go to school, and then you have to do 2 years, and you have to get good grades because you got to get the recommendations from your profs, because you think at 19 you're going to get hired by a full-time department without them, right? So you go and you do that, and then that's competitiveness, right? And then you go to a gym and you got to do your physical fitness test, and so then you're competing with everybody else for thousands of jobs because, Toronto hosts maybe 50 every 5 years, right? So, and then you got to keep that up. And then once you get in, then you got to climb the rank. The whole piece of that competitiveness is built in. And the minute you show weakness, you're asked to leave. You're asked to walk out, and everything you've built, man. And, what was the advice I was given when I was looking at doing career work was take out a loan for 10 grand and expect 5 years worth of testing. That's what it was going to cost you in time and money, right? Because the testing is like $120 every time you go. And, we can have conversations about, the shit people have been getting in for their training fund, but we won't go there. But you deal with that the whole time you're in the service. The moment you look at them and say, I need help, they see, and this is philosophically, although I bet you there's people like this, and actually I know that there is, I've heard stories of it, but you see someone that says, your rank is mine. Your rank is mine. So not only are you stripped of the identity, but somebody that's supposed to have your back, right, is now gunning for your rank, or this is my opportunity. And the identity issue is so huge, right? It's so huge. That's why when you retire from the service, depression rates are increasing. That's why you have to have a program for recent retirees, because the culture is so huge. You're no longer the hero. You're the used to be hero. And, and that's just exiting from retirement, right? That's just that. If you were to suggest that you have a mental health program or a problem, that's it. You're done. You're out and you're looking in, and not what's worse than that is, you know, what's on the inside, which is that feeling of protection, that feeling of camaraderie that's there when you maybe didn't need it, but had it anyways. But the moment you need it, you're stepped on. And if we know anything from the research, that peer support, once that's gone, man, you're toast. You're toast. You need that. You need that. Humans need that, right? So it's just this basic premise that when you need them the most, right? We say when you need them the most, you're there, except for, right? That's what we don't tell people, except for if you say you have a mental health problem, because then you become the other. You become that scared, the I don't know, stigmatized other, and that means you're no longer in this tribe. I think, anyways, and I'm not sure if, Brian, if you can speak from the police, if that may be backed up, but that's kind of where my mind goes and what I see and how I conceptualize what happens when you have a fall from grace like that. One of the most frustrating things to hear is when I go do these talks, and there was such a brave person that came in and shared his story. I think for the first time, definitely people knew it was up, but they had asked me to come in because they had somebody that was recently diagnosed PTSD, and this is a big deal for them, right? And his words pierced me when he said, "I don't know if I'll ever walk through those doors again." And to me, that's wrong. To me, that's the purpose of what I do. That's my drive. That's what After Call is all about, is the idea that when you join in on this thing, you should walk out a better human being, not worse off. You should walk out of that job on your own terms. And I think that's the goal to strive to. We could hope to get rid of all the stigma, but I'm not sure if that'll happen, right? You can hope to get rid of the mental illness, but trauma's not going anywhere. So we need to make sure that when we are involved in jobs that are so laden in this, instead of running from it and trying to get rid of it, what we need to do is embrace it, embrace what's going to allow us to overcome it, and embrace the ability of our peers to have our backs when we need it the most, so we can walk off this job on our own terms.
You know what? I agree with you completely on both, or sort of on both sides of it. First off, about the struggle to get in, and you fight and fight and fight. You spend money, you do testing. Hope you're competing with thousands of other people, all who want the same job, and you finally get in, and then you owe money for paying your tuition at OPC. Yeah. I can't speak for other police services, but the OPP, we receive anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 applications a year. At least that was the last number I heard. We'll hire maybe 1,500 recruits in a year, and maybe a couple hundred experienced officers. Right. And then so you're already starting at a huge disadvantage, and it's so frustrating. And this is for another show, of course, but so many good candidates I see get turned down, and then the people who end up getting on don't pan out. They're hired for whatever reason, nepotism, or because they fill a niche, and they just simply don't work out. But that's for another time.
How much of a problem is it, do you think, that we as a society criminalize the ways that people cope with pain, right? Because to me, this is a huge problem. And I don't really know what the solution is, but I'd love to hear your input. Because when I gave a talk, and this happens all the time, every time I give a talk, the last one I gave at Toronto Police Service, for example, 2 different people came up to me. Probably 10 people talked to me after the call. Two different people came up to me and told me how, for example, they can't cope with the anxiety and the depression that they feel, so they smoke pot every night. Right. But there's no fucking way they're going to say that at work. So, right. And it's funny as you look into, I don't know if you deal with addictions or not, but based on my own personal history, and I know with Brian's personal history and everything I've read about it, addictions are always a way of coping with pain. Right. Yeah. So they're not because you like the taste of whiskey. It's something much deeper than that. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, firstly, I won't say the name because I'll get in trouble. But my 9 to 5. So what I tell everybody, I'm a terrible business person because after the call makes no money because I do everything pro bono. Right. But I pay my mortgage on addictions. I actually work as an opiate counselor. So I work with people using opiates all day. And I just did a talk with Badge of Life on first responders and addiction. So that was an interesting segue. but I can, I don't even know where to begin with that one, because it's so true. And then what happens again, I can only speak from my side of the chair. What I see in everybody is this lost ability to then reconnect with the body. And that's really what pain is that uncomfortable feeling we get. And we can't discern emotional pain from physical pain, right? Like, if physical pain we're allowed to feel. You break your leg, it's cool for you to feel that, because then that's the story, right? I broke my leg, you elaborate, it becomes a big thing, and you brag about it. But then what I see is people that have that story, broke that leg, and then get Percocet, or they get, oxys. And then they find out at some point during that journey that when I feel like shit, I take an opiate, man, I feel better, right? And we know that the opiate, for instance, works on the same emotional pain receptors. So, it eliminates physical pain, but also eliminates emotional pain. And I think we can say that that's easily the case for, all kinds of addictions. Is if the avoidance of something, often pain, right? That makes the most sense. But sometimes it's just, I have no idea how to regulate what the hell is happening in my body. It is uncomfortable. It sucks. But I know, and this is what I have a hard time getting people to admit to, that I know that this works, right? What I'm not saying is this is good, but it works, and we need to acknowledge that it works for a time. And that acknowledgement allows us to radically accept that this was a viable coping strategy for a time, right? You don't come to see me because things are going well, right? It still does exactly as you set out to do, but then you realize that when I do that, when I disconnect myself from my pain, my emotions, the rest of my world goes to shit. It'd be interesting to hear if how you relate to that, knowing your story as well, Jason, but that's certainly what I see in the folks that I deal with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, to me, and I've talked about this before, to me, the alcohol worked at the beginning, right? I couldn't see, I mean, it worked and it also didn't work at the same time, but the things that I was trying to hide or numb or even run from, those were so acute. Those emotions were so acute that really, and none of this was a conscious decision on my part at all. It was just something that happened. But so even though there was, adverse consequences of the result of how much I was drinking, I mean, the primary objective I was trying to achieve, it seemed to be working. Now, over time, obviously, sort of the scales would tip more and more, right? But that's all very blurry and hard for somebody that's going through it. And I'm sure you see this too. Like, I wish I had somebody to tell me that, to be able to talk to me and to acknowledge it didn't work. But because for me, it sort of worked. It seemed to be working, but it was also not working. And then it got worse. And it was all like, I just didn't have the tools to understand what was even happening to me and how to do something differently.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's really important, and I don't think I'm straying too far from our main points when I say that language here is so important, right? So even when you were talking about that, you talk about running away from the problems, right? I hear that every day. And I say, you're not running from the problems. You're not running from you're not making the problems go away, right? You're going away. The problems stay. They grow while you're there. That the idea that you run from the problems is to say that we're actually leaving, and we don't leave, right? We don't leave. They're there. We just hide them, or largely make them so that when we sit right beside them, I can not look them in the eyes, right? When they sit beside me, they stare at me, they claw at me, they still do damage to me, but as long as I'm engaged in this activity, I can say that it's not there, right? So, when we're kids, what do we do when we're scared of the boogeyman, right? We pull up the sheets. You can't see me, I can't see you. And I think that's so embodied as an adult, and we call it all kinds of different things, but that's the same basic premise as far as I can tell.
It's funny, I read a good quote yesterday that talks about that, and it just really hit me. I think it goes something like this: the surest way to go to hell is to try to run from hell.
Right. And it makes sense, because once you try to run from it, you recognize all the ways that you're failing to run from it. And it's, I think the climbing out of hell the climbing out of hell in that philosophical, but certainly real. Like, and I wrote an article on this where I said, it's, people that come to see me, it's not figurative. They're in hell. They are in, as far as I can tell, they are in hell. Everything is going to shit. They're in pain. They're tortured every day. Trying to find reasons to continue moving on is difficult, if not impossible. And it was a miracle that they just got out of their damn bed to come see me. That, as far as I can tell, is exactly how you draw hell. So when we talk about it, I really try to drive that home, that you're there, right? That's where you are, but you're still with the sheets over your head. You've still got, and I'm not being dismissive of how difficult that is, or at least I try not to be. It's really cognizant of the difficulty there. But the moment that you pull that sheet down and you look it in the eyes is the moment that it becomes down to a size that you can fight, right? Whatever that means for you. And sometimes that means looking in and realizing that some shitty things happened to me, but ignoring that they happened isn't helping me cope with it. I need to try something new. And that's to say, yeah, this stuff happened, right? And as soon as you acknowledge, as soon as you say that, that's like, boom, that's the light that I see in the room, right? When they come to that realization, man, they've reconnected for a second. And that moment of clarity for them is often what helps folks move forward, right? My particular branch of what I do obviously has a physical dependence, much like alcohol as well, right? So then we see, as we're coming down, the dangers of doing that. And sometimes the physical dangers are enough just to bring you back too, which is something completely different. But if I take this into the first responder world, what I see is the same thing. We're pulling the cloak over our eyes. And I can tell you, when I started, there was still a beer fridge. There's still a beer fridge in one of the fire halls, right? There's still a beer fridge there. And so it's like, you had a bad call. That sucked. Here's a pat on your back. You're a hero. Have a beer. You'll feel a little bit better. And man, it fucking works, right? And so then you go, well, then I can have two, and two will make me feel even better. And then I can have one at 10 a.m. because I'm feeling pain before I get there, and so on, right? So I don't know. Again, I'm kind of ranting there, but this is something that, I think that I'm seeing more and more of, and something that we're not even touching that in the first responder field. That, PTSD is so the fad and vogue right now. That we're not touching addictions. We're not touching emotions. We're not touching mental wellness on the continuum, because you can not have a disorder and still be, just getting by, right? And so the idea that mental health ranges from languishing, that's the hell, to flourishing, which is, you're doing so well and you continue to do well. And I think it's just tying that in and breaking this one-trick pony, not because I want to take away from it, certainly not, but because it's the worst-case scenario. So why not let's start somewhere where we can start making the changes so that we don't get to the worst-case scenario. I don't know if that made any sense, but, that's largely what I'm seeing, right, is that this idea that I can't even talk about pain. And, talking about pain is like talking about shame. You can't talk about those things, right? Unless you're physically hurt. And not if you're men, especially not if you're male, as far as I can tell. You can't talk about pain if you're a male. You can only talk about being angry, and then that's it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, I'd say you're bang on there. Yeah. When you hear the person talk, and it is with guys, right? It seems to be more with guys, which is exactly why Jay came up with this idea that we fostered, with a safe space for guys. Yeah. Like you said, to hear them talk, it's pain, it's shame, it's regret, but it's always couched as, I'm mad, I'm pissed off, the organization is friggin' stupid. It's never, I shouldn't say never, it's seldom actually what it is, right? It's the mask is still on, and usually you either feel that you're finally completely understood and you'll break some of the walls down, or you'll have, a literal crash and, end up in a sobbing heap, talking about, again, we'll use shame because that was something you sort of specifically noted. Mm-hmm. Whether that be shame that, I feel like I let a friend die, or I was sexually assaulted when I was a kid, or I've done some things for drugs, or I've done some things while high that I'm ashamed of. And generally, those don't come out in routine conversation, and they usually are covered up with, like I said, I hate the world, or I'm pissed off at my employer. So, and I don't know how to. I'm not entirely sure how to defeat that. I think things like this are a great start, and having open conversation is a fantastic start, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we often joke that we wish when people came in and sat in our chairs that they'd say, "I'm feeling really shameful today," because that would save us a lot of session time, right? And then I could just ask you what you're shameful about, and we could talk about that. You'd be on your way, man. We'd solve a lot of problems, right? We would solve immediately a lot of problems. But it's we can't talk about shame without talking about emotion, and you can't talk about emotion if we're men. And you just can't. And I joke with my clients, and it's a great way to break through. And I straight up asked them, I said, do you know the two emotions that you're allowed to share? And maybe I'll do this with you folks to see if it works the same way. Do you know the two emotions that men are allowed to share culturally?
Anger is one.
For sure. Okay.
Is it something as simple as happiness?
No, it's no emotion. You're not allowed to show happiness, right? You can have a smile and you can be proud perhaps, but you can't show happiness. Right? You're allowed to show anger and no emotion, right? The stoic. You're allowed to, you go to a funeral, you stay straight faced, stern, you don't smile. That's to show that you're grieving, right? And I say this to folks and they go, okay. And then they agree to it. And then all we do is talk about anger, right? And so I say, if I were to walk into your office and kick you in the shin, you have every right to be angry. But often when people come through here, it's not so straightforward. So, and I say, so you're angry. Yeah. What are you angry about? This. Well, why are you angry? Because they did this. And it's like, okay, but what is the purpose of the anger, and is something else there? So an easy example of this is if you were driving and you cut me off, right? Ignoring the finger that you might get and some cuss words that I might throw at you, right? I'm going to be angry, and you're going to see this. This is with road rage, right? But I ask you, what did you feel first? And you'll say anger, and I say, but are you sure? Because I bet you it was fear. And why do you say that? Because you're driving a 2,000-pound missile, and somebody just cut you off, and you for a moment were scared because you saw the frailty of your life in a glimpse. And so then you get angry because you're not allowed to feel fear, right? And they get that, and they love that. They're not allowed to feel that fear, so that they're angry. And it's like, okay, but whose day is ruined if you stay angry? Your day. Your day is. Yeah,
absolutely.
If you stay angry, that's just the guy who cut you off didn't even know, right? And we've all done this. We cut people off. We had no idea. We get the finger and we're just like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what's wrong with them. But, you ruin your own day. But the moment you say, wow, I was a bit afraid, the moment you name it, is the moment you take the power away from it, because you bring it outside of your brain, who is just going to mold it into whatever it wants when it's in there. So you take it out and you go, yeah, I was fearful, and damn it if I don't feel a little bit more relief of naming what it is. So, especially when you talk to men, right, that naming is one thing, but when you talk to a man and you ask him to tell me what you're feeling, right, what are you feeling? He says, well, I'm feeling confused. And no, in your body, what is your body saying? Right? What is your body telling you? It's like, well, my body's feeling upset. It's like, God damn it, man. Right? Like, what is it feeling like right now? There's a thing between your head and your body. You know what it is? It's a neck. And for God's sake, connects the two. They're not separate things, right? So we have Descartes to thank for that. But anyways, we're working hard against them. It's just recognizing that unless those two things are in unison, you're always going to have this disconnect, right? You're going to have the analytic who always continuously tries to think these things through, to think them, to figure out what it is by thinking about it. Like, I'm going to just solve it in my mind. And that's completely cutting off their body, to the point where sometimes they come in and say that they're overwhelmed, literally because they have no idea what they're feeling.
That is so interesting, man. And kind of on that, one thing that I've been really becoming very curious about, and I'd be curious to hear your experience with it, is that I think especially as guys, and especially, in a culture, maybe some of the more extreme cultures in the first responder world, but really anywhere, I think we are it's drilled into us that we have to be, the captains of our destiny. We have to practice self-mastery. So when something happens to us, and it's a traumatic event and it takes a toll on us, or it's a series of traumatic events, I think what happened with me and what I see happen with a lot of people is we try to master the thing that is happening, the symptom that is happening right now. But we don't, when we've experienced emotional trauma, I think sometimes we don't have the capacity to master those choices right now because we need to heal. Like, it's crazy how many fucking guys I talk to. I mean, I've started asking this to everybody who will say, like a lot of the guys in the mental health warriors group, they'll be like, oh my God, I'm dealing with depression, I'm dealing with anxiety. I'll get them on the phone, I'll be like, what happened in your childhood, man? Like, and it's just, and they won't connect the two. For a million different reasons. One, maybe it's so painful, they don't want to revisit it. But I think a bigger part of it is honestly that I need to be able to master the shit that I am doing right now. And every time I fail and prove that I am not capable of doing it, it is just another reconfirmation that I don't measure up, that I am a failure. And it's just this vicious fucking cycle that never stops.
Yeah. And you bring up the interesting thing, right? There's a, again, I'm not trying to get too technical, but there's an interesting body of therapy called internal family systems, and essentially they avoid becoming too Freudian because that shit will get you in trouble. But what they're saying is, if you come to my office and you say you're feeling anxious, and you know me well enough, because this exercise gets pretty weird if you don't know people, but if you know me well enough, I'll lead you down into this exercise. It forces you, A, to feel your body, so that sucks. But B, it forces you, I ask you when the first time you felt this was. And people don't say this morning, right? And it's interesting, man. And it as I think about it, it gives me chills because it's so powerful. Because when I ask this question, they don't say this morning, they don't say last week, they say, I go, do you remember the first time you ever felt this? And they say, yeah, I was 5 years old, and I was bullied at school, or I was 5 years old and my dad beat me, or and this shit just comes out, right? And then it's all about like, holy. So every time you feel afraid, it's not you feeling afraid. It is, but mostly it's that 5-year-old inside you feeling afraid, and you react the same way. So you react the exact same way by throwing tantrums, becoming emotionally dysregulated to the point that you're punching walls, or or you can't handle those, so you start drinking or whatever, right? And it's just so interesting that you talk about that, because there's an entire modality built around just that. Is that you had this experience. When was it? It was when you were a child. Okay, so now what? As your compassionate self, you know that you're okay because you're sitting in my chair. You know that you're all right. You survived that moment in your childhood or your teens or your early whatever of when you experienced that. What would you tell yourself? And that's the powerful moment. That's self-repair. What would you tell? What do you need? What did you need to hear in that moment? And I want you to tell that to yourself now, right? And I mean, I'm not doing it any justice, mostly because it just doesn't have the place here. But essentially, that's what you're doing. You know what I mean? And that's essentially. That's what you're doing, and it's that self-compassion that you cannot give yourself for whatever reason. And certainly not as a man. I can't show love. What's love, right? I got companionship. I can't show love, because showing love means I got to show sadness and happiness, because in order to show love, I got to show emotion, right? And I can't do that as a man. So it's just it's so damaging, the cultural view on our emotions, right? And that's. Anybody that's come through my door, I just go there, and we've got so much work to do already. And half the time you don't even have to really process any of the memories themselves. If I can help you cope with the emotional aftermath, half the time that's enough, right?
That's really interesting, man. So another thing I wanted to ask you about is, I guess actually first to follow up with that, it's amazing to me that how little that is talked about. Maybe when I think of psychiatry, for example, and again, I have a very limited experience of just my own personal experience, seeing Cindy with a psychiatrist, but it just blew me away how none of those emotionally significant events let's say, were ever brought up as being in any way, nobody ever asked about it. Like, no, as being possibly connected to the, emotional dysregulation that was happening right at this moment. I guess we're a symptom-based society, right? And whether I think that's infected our medical system. I think it's infected our way that we look at our place in the world and how we're supposed to respond when things are difficult. I mean, it's brutal.
Yeah. I think it's symptom-based for sure, because that's what you keep showing up in my office for. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's what you keep showing up in the ER for. And if you show up in the ER for back pain, this is really interesting. This is this kind of new research coming out, but untreated and sometimes treated, but untreated trauma is actually manifesting itself in fibromyalgia, right? And that blows me away. Why? Because that is a mental aspect directly affecting your body, right? And it's like, that shit blows me away. Like, take care of yourself, right? That's scary stuff. And that's what I tell the first responders, is that if you want to carry this around, that's fine, but expect to feel physical pain, because if your body's telling you something and you're not listening, it's going to find another way to tell you that, right? It's going to find another way to tell you that. But I just think that people are too quick to forget, right? Like, where the hell do you think we learn this stuff from? We're not Nemo. We don't just live in that day, right? If I can make that shitty connection. We don't just live in that moment, or whatever the fish is, Dory. I'm really, really leading myself down a bad road there, that I know that. But it's that you're right. It's not that moment. It's not that moment. And you learned how to respond to that moment somewhere. And it wasn't last week, because last week you did the same damn thing. That's why you're in my office. And the week before, because it's no longer working. Where did you learn that? You learned that as a kid. You learn that as a kid, that when if I can be, bold, that if you're being abused, that you can dissociate. You can literally take your mind somewhere else so that it protects you. Your brain is protecting you, right? And so it's not against you, right? Your brain is not working against you. That's what, especially with folks with anxiety, right? It's like, why can't I shut this thing off? And I say, because it's protecting you in the only way you know how. The only way that kind of worked at once. So not only do we have to deal with the anxiety, the symptoms themselves, but we got to deal with the cause, right? We got to deal not with the cough, but with the cold itself.
Yeah, that's really interesting, man. One last thing I wanted to talk to you about was, as you know, we're reading the book Tribe in the Mental Health Warriors community. So it's sort of our first book club project. But what the author Sebastian Junger, the case he makes is really compelling about how community and connection and relying on each other and feeling valued and important and all of those things, a lot of those things that were present in, he uses the American Indian culture as an example of one that was really, egalitarian and community based and just a very different structure than ours. And I guess the point he's making is that in those cultures, or when there is a time of great tragedy, like, for example, after 9/11, incidents of suicide went down. People's post-traumatic stress symptoms, as they reported, went down. And his contention is because the sense of community was so much greater, and the idea that we are all working together really helped people, I guess, made them feel valued and had a positive impact on their emotional health. And I think what happens in our culture is that we are isolated, right? Whether it's in the first responder culture and you're out and you're the as you said earlier, you're the other, or whether it's the symptoms, the shame that people feel as a result of not fitting in the box or feeling like they're broken causes them to isolate themselves. When really, I think one of the paths to healing is actually the opposite, right? Having a strong sense of community.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's true. I mean, that's just what it is. If we look at, and I don't pretend to know the exact stats, so I'll talk broadly. And if somebody listens to this and can call me on it and correct me, then fair enough. But as far as I can tell, if you look at the two big world wars that we had, when people came back, yes, we had trauma. That's undeniable. However, the majority of people are okay, right? I certainly had family members that came back in active combat that are, as far as I could tell, functioning in all right? Again, we all have scars, and some of us still have scabs, but certainly you can function, right? But the interesting thing is to look at the Vietnam War, because when you came back, you were spit on. Everybody hated you for going over there, right? Just even though it was your job and you didn't have a choice, everybody hated you. That was like the most dismissed war, maybe next to the Iraq War, right? So what happened is we actually did see the increases in those things. We saw the impact of them hitting harder because there was no of that camaraderie aspect at the end of it, right? And it really, really interesting, especially connected to the warrior stuff. But we start to look at, I started reading Herodotus and talking about the essentially the 300 War and the ritualistic ways that the Leonidas led his Spartans through each of those things, right? Like weird shit that they were like, the other people are like, what the hell? And it's that ritual and sense of community that brings people together. I mean, we don't have to go far, right? You've got a group and it's functioning in just that way. Right? And if we want even smaller scale, then you come to a group. Why? Because it is so validating to hear someone else say, as you're trying to move with your movement, that, my life has had struggles too. And the moment you allow that said is the moment that you have validated every fucking thing that is going wrong in their lives and saying, oh, I'm not alone. Because your brain works so hard to make you feel like this is only specific to you, right? And I call it the singing in the car syndrome, where you think everybody's watching you belt out Britney Spears songs in the privacy of your own car, but actually nobody cares, right? You're just driving, but your idea that you are the center of the universe goes against you here. And you remove that when you're in a community, right? That's why groups are usually circles. Right? That's why groups are circles, is because you are not the center of that group. You are within a community of folks. And, the idea, I think there's no spot for this here, but I think politically and societally, how we have constructed ourselves for success is largely to blame in a lot of those regards. It's the competitiveness in the first responders, certainly, which leads down that. And it's the idea that we are the hero at the end of the day. And there is only one hero, right? You watch a movie, there's only one real hero, right? Even if you watch the Avengers, there's one main hero, and we'll argue about who that is, but that's one main hero. And as far as I can tell, what happens is we decidedly make one person the center of attention, and we try to embody that because they're expressing those things that we want. Right? They're expressing those traits that maybe we don't have, the heroicism, or being courageous or what have you. But it's one person, and everybody around them falls to their feet and is there to, help them in the small aspects. But that one person leads it, right? The moment you show me a movie where everybody is like the hero at the end in equal amounts and there's no arguing about it, I think this is the movie you watch a movie flop because nobody wants to see that.
Nick, you know what? I'm going to put on my history geek hat here because that was my undergrad before I went to law school. And
okay.
Your stats are bang on, with regards to the experiences after the war. And actually, it's funny because when Jay first mentioned it, he used the analogy of 9/11, and I remember reading that in London in World War II during the Blitz. That exact thing happened. The rates of suicide went down. The rates of violent crime went down. Even petty crime went down. Muggings and things like that, because there was a common thread that drew everybody together. Right? Mm-hmm. People were galvanized into action, so they felt, they had a purpose. It was basically all of us against the Germans. So we don't have time to attack each other. We don't, I can't kill myself today. I have to be here to fight Hitler. So, and then, like you said, compare that to the experience in Vietnam, which was a very reviled war, which didn't have popular support. Left those poor bastards who came back to that. There were no parades. There were no, heroes marches down Broadway into Times Square. They were left more or less on their own, and you can see that reflected still today.
Yeah.
So your analogy and your stats are bang on, my friend.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate that. It's nice to be validated for sure. So, but the other thing that reminds me of is going back to this image of the hero. And as we were talking about this, I just kind of made the connection, which is just great, is that, the connection between addictions and what they do for us and the image of the hero is that we put on this hero hat and it works for a time, and I've seen, that maybe that become apparent to everybody else, but to me, that's just dawning on me is that when we put on the uniform, actually, and I think there's research that would probably back me up on this when I have to go and check again, but when I put on a uniform, it's a bit of a protective factor. Right, it really is, because I don this on and then I don the mask of hero, and so that I can practice self-regulation, because if I am feeling a little bit stressed out, I can just bury myself in being the rescuer for others, and I can just bury myself in the paperwork of the job, and I only have to worry about myself after this 12 hours of the other mounting stresses and potential traumas, and then I can take this off, and then I just got to survive to my next shift. Right. And it works for a time, but then there's a shift. And that shift is when your work and your life blend together so that the chaos becomes such that you can no longer control it. And I think that is the moment that you need the community. And at that moment is the moment everybody around you wants to let you go, right? Because you're no longer them, you're the other.
Yeah, that's really profound, man. So, hey, listen, we're getting close to the end of our time here, and it's just been wonderful. So, we've talked a lot about people who are dealing with mental health issues or, emotional trauma. What do you think you would say to people, to everybody else, let's say? Honestly, in some ways we've all dealt with emotional trauma, but if people were to take away something that they could do, or a piece of, some guidance that you could give them to change something that they are doing right now that could help eliminate stigma, just make it go away, what would you suggest?
Well, there's certainly lots of things that I think you could do, but I think the main thing that you could do to try to eliminate stigma is look it in the eyes. I think you need to address that it is there, and I think you need to sit beside that monster. I call it taming the black dog or the monster, right? In order to do that, you need to actually walk with that dog on a leash for a bit, which means you're connected to it. You need to make that connection to it. You need to recognize the impact of it on you, whether that's, to your detriment now, or you can see it to the detriment of others, and everybody can see that. So if you want to make stigma go away, you can't run from it. You can't pull the sheets over your head. You need to look it in the eyes. And that's an uncomfortable thing, because at that moment, you recognize that you can be vulnerable and impacted too. And you know what? I think, and I've said this more than one, you want to show someone's true strength. True strength isn't ignoring these things or denying that they are there just to uphold your selfish idea of the hero, right? That's not true strength. That's cowardice, because you're getting into this field to profoundly affect people and save their lives, but save your own by suggesting that I am no different than these people, except for my training and a large part of this luck. And don't make this luck unlucky for myself, right? So look it in the eyes, recognize that I can hold this leash, walk this dog for a bit. And if I get to know that a little bit, if I get to recognize and kind of understand stigma, if I get to sit beside this dog and pet it, when it comes to bite me, it knows me, and maybe I can quelch it before it gets a piece of me.
That's awesome. Brian, did you have anything else for our esteemed guest this evening?
No, you know what? I don't think so. It's nice to hear that even in a different service, there are lots of shared experiences. So that's heartening. Yet it also is a bit sobering when you talk about the differences and you realize, in some sense, we still have a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, I one thing that I said to some people that I was at a conference, I say, I surround myself with folks like yourselves as well, and I say, what the hell's left to do? We're all talking about this. Everybody knows about it. Like, what more can I do, right? And then I get that phone call from one of the chiefs around here, or I get that phone call or that email saying, am I normal? This is what's happening to me. Am I normal? And I'm like, how? Obviously, there's work left to do if you're calling me with something like that, right? And, obviously I don't get angry at them, but I just get so angry at how we could still be there. How can you call me and say, I'm having nightmares? Am I normal? Of course you're fucking normal, right? That's how your body processes it. Of course you're normal. Why is it me having to tell you that? Why isn't it the chief telling you that? Why isn't your fellow person telling you that? And if they are, why aren't you believing them? Once we get to that point, I think we're going to see some real sweeping change. But the nihilist in me thinks that maybe we'll never get there, but a boy can hope.
No kidding. Well,
That's
listen.
all we've got.
Yeah. You know what? What a great place to end it. So, how can people? Why don't you tell the audience what you're doing now? I know you have a book, and we'll put all the links to everything you tell us about in the show notes page so people can find you. Because I think there's going to be some people that want to reach out to you. So, what do you got going on right now, man?
So I got some really exciting conferences that are coming up. There'll be a press release I think in a week about one, and that'll be going up. I won't say anything before that because I'll probably get in trouble if I do. I got another conference going up in September in Northumberland. So one's in Peterborough, one's in Northumberland. I got a couple presentations. I've done some work with the local college, so I'm hoping to get back in there and help some of the students out. But mostly what I'm doing is I'm going around trying to create community, bringing the family back into the first responder role in writing. So one of the things I'm going to do after I get off the call with you guys is submit a presentation to the FDIC down in Indianapolis for next year. So maybe we can make some sweeping changes there. And other than that, I'm just keep writing, keep going, and give me a call and let's make some changes. And I'm always looking forward to recruit some stigma crushing change ninjas.
Nick, do you want to
crushing change ninjas? I love it.
Yeah.
Nick, do you want to throw out the web address really quick, the site address real quick?
Yeah, sure. It's just afterthecall.org. And you can reach me there. I'm on Facebook and Twitter as well, so give me a follow. That always boosts my ego and pushes me a little further. Maybe you write an extra 1,000 words that day, right? So I'm directly related to you. But one of the things that I think is underutilized that I wish more people did was contact me with stuff that I don't have on my site, because that really I think that'd be really beneficial. I can only write what I see in people that I talk with and what I think is important, but certainly if there's something up there that you wish you could see or read or have, shoot me a line. I'm happy to produce it or figure it out for you.
Awesome.
Thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you, brother.
No, thank you, Nick. We're happy to have you as part of the community. That's for sure.
All right. Take care, man.
And boom, we're done. Thank you, Nick. That was an enlightening and entertaining interview. I know Brian feels the same way, and I'm sure the people who listen to it are going to get a ton of value out of it. And I really appreciate the work you're doing to try to change the culture in organizations, especially first responder organizations, and teaching people about the concept and importance of mental wellness. You're doing great work, brother, and I'm honored to call you a friend. And again, thank you for being such an active participant in the Mental Health Warriors group. If you want to find us on the web, you can find us at mentalhealthwarriors.com. You can search for Mental Health Warriors in Facebook. You'll find us there. And all the links to join the Mental Health Warriors private community will be in the show notes page, along with the links to Nick's book and his website, where you can find out more about Nick and what he's doing and maybe work with him. So I want to close out, as I always close out, with this message to you. If you're struggling, I want you to know that I have struggled too. And if you ever want to talk, I will not judge you. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for tuning into this week's show. And for more episodes and resources, head on over to mentalhealthwarriors.com.